The morning sun cast long shadows across Bagram Airfield as Captain Sarah Ghost Mitchell completed her pre-flight inspection of the A-10 Thunderbolt II. The aircraft, affectionately known as the Warthog, bore the scars of countless missions over Afghanistan. Each dent and patch told a story of close calls and successful ground support operations that had saved countless American lives. Sarah ran her hand along the aircraft's titanium bathtub that protected the cockpit. This particular Warthog, tail number 78-0691, had become something of a legend among the pilots at Bagram. It had flown more combat missions than any other A-10 in the squadron and had never failed to bring its pilot home. Today would mark Sarah's 47th mission in this very aircraft. The intelligence briefing had been routine. Taliban forces had been spotted massing near a remote village in the Kunar province. Ground forces were requesting close air support to prevent the insurgents from overrunning a small Afghan army outpost. It was the kind of mission Sarah had flown dozens of times before, but she never allowed herself to become complacent. In this business, complacency killed. As she climbed into the cockpit, Sarah noticed Lieutenant Colonel James Hawk Morrison approaching her aircraft. Morrison was the squadron commander, a veteran pilot with over 3,000 flight hours in the A-10. He rarely came out to see off individual pilots unless something was different about the mission. "Ghost, got a minute?" Morrison called up to her. Sarah paused in her startup sequence and leaned out of the cockpit. "What's up, Colonel?" "Intel just came in. The situation at that outpost is deteriorating faster than expected. The Afghans are taking heavy fire, and they've got wounded that need immediate evacuation. You're going to be working directly with a Marine reconnaissance team that's been inserted to help coordinate the defense." Sarah nodded grimly. Working with ground forces always added complexity to the mission, but it also meant American lives were on the line. "Any word on enemy air defenses?" "Nothing confirmed, but be aware that this area has seen increased shoulder-fired missile activity in recent weeks. Keep your eyes open and trust your instincts." Morrison's expression was serious. "This one matters, Sarah. Those Marines are counting on you." As Morrison walked away, Sarah completed her pre-flight checklist with extra care. The Gu-8 Avenger cannon mounted in the nose of the aircraft was loaded with 1,150 rounds of 30mm depleted uranium ammunition. The aircraft also carried a mix of Maverick missiles and cluster bombs on its external pylons. It was enough firepower to turn the tide of any ground engagement. The flight to Kunar province took 90 minutes, giving Sarah time to study the terrain and coordinate with a forward air controller on the ground. Staff Sergeant Mike Wolverine Rodriguez had been with the reconnaissance team for 6 months and had developed an intimate knowledge of the local geography. His voice crackled through Sarah's headset as she approached the target area. "Ghost, this is Wolverine. Good to have you overhead. Situation is as follows. We've got approximately 40 to 50 Taliban fighters positioned in a tree line about 800 meters northwest of the Afghan outpost. They've got the outpost pinned down with heavy machine gun fire and are preparing to advance. We need you to break up that assault before they overrun the position." Sarah banked the Warthog into a wide circle around the target area, scanning the ground below with practiced eyes. The terrain was typical for this region of Afghanistan. Rocky hills covered with sparse vegetation, intersected by dry creek beds and small clusters of mud brick buildings. She could see muzzle flashes from the tree line that Rodriguez had identified, and smoke was rising from several points around the Afghan outpost. "Wolverine, I've got eyes on the tree line. Can you mark the friendly positions for me?" "Roger, Ghost. Friendlies are marked with orange panels on the roof of the main building. We've got wounded inside that need immediate evacuation, but we can't get a helicopter in until you neutralize that machine gun position." Sarah lined up for her first attack run, dropping altitude to 3,000 feet. The Warthog's distinctive twin engines roared as she pushed the throttles forward. Through her targeting system, she could see individual Taliban fighters moving between the trees. The machine gun position was clearly visible, a PCAM mounted on a tripod with several fighters clustered around it. The Gu-8 cannon erupted with its characteristic BRRRT sound as Sarah fired a 2-second burst. The 30mm rounds tore through the tree line like a chainsaw, splintering trees and sending up clouds of dirt and debris. The machine gun fell silent immediately, and Sarah could see the Taliban fighters scattering in all directions. "Beautiful work, Ghost." Rodriguez's voice was jubilant. "You got the gun position, but we've got movement in the ravine to the east. Looks like they're trying to flank the outpost." Sarah banked hard to the right and spotted the movement immediately. A group of about 15 Taliban fighters was using a dry creek bed to approach the outpost from an unexpected direction. If they succeeded in reaching the eastern wall, the defenders would be caught in a crossfire. "I see them, Wolverine. Keep your heads down." This attack run required more precision. The creek bed was only about 200 meters from the outpost, close enough that any miscalculation could result in friendly casualties. Sarah lined up carefully and fired a series of short bursts, walking the cannon fire along the creek bed. The rounds impacted with devastating effect, and the flanking attempt was broken before it could develop. For the next 20 minutes, Sarah continued to work over the target area, methodically destroying Taliban positions and breaking up every attempt to organize an assault on the outpost. The Warthog's armor allowed her to fly low and slow, giving her the precision needed to engage targets in close proximity to friendly forces. Each pass brought new requests from Rodriguez as he directed her fire against emerging threats. "Ghost, you're doing outstanding work down there," came a new voice on the radio. This was Captain Tom "Eagle" Hartley, flying an F-16 Fighting Falcon as part of a 2-ship formation that had been vectored to the area. "We've been monitoring your work from high altitude. Impressive flying." Sarah keyed her radio. "Thanks, Eagle. Just doing the job. We've got about 15 minutes of loiter time before we have to head back to base. Do you need any assistance?" Sarah was about to respond when her radar warning receiver began chirping. Someone was painting her aircraft with a targeting radar. In Afghanistan, that could only mean one thing: surface-to-air missiles. "Eagle, I'm being illuminated by SAM radar. Can you confirm any missile sites in this area?" There was a pause before Hartley responded. "Negative, Ghost. We don't show any known SAM sites in your vicinity. Could be a mobile launcher that intel missed." Sarah's training kicked in immediately. She began defensive maneuvering, varying her altitude, and heading to make targeting difficult for any potential missile system. The radar warning continued to chirp intermittently, indicating that whoever was operating the system was probably trying to get a solid lock on her aircraft. "Wolverine, I'm picking up SAM activity in the area. Do you have eyes on any suspicious vehicles or equipment?" "Negative, Ghost. We haven't seen anything like that from our position." Sarah continued her evasive maneuvers while maintaining her attack pattern against the remaining Taliban positions. The situation on the ground was still critical. The Afghan outpost was holding, but they had wounded soldiers who needed evacuation, and that couldn't happen until the area was completely secure. As she rolled into another attack run, Sarah's missile warning system suddenly screamed to life. 2 surface-to-air missiles had been launched and were tracking toward her aircraft. The computer calculated impact in 18 seconds. "Missiles in the air! Missiles in the air!" Sarah transmitted as she threw the Warthog into the most aggressive evasive maneuvers the aircraft could handle. She deployed chaff and flares while diving toward the deck, hoping to break the missile's lock-on. The first missile streaked past her left wing, missing by less than 50 feet. The second missile maintained its track, and Sarah could see it in her peripheral vision, a white contrail growing larger by the second. At the last possible moment, she pulled the aircraft into a crushing 9G turn that pushed her to the edge of consciousness. The missile detonated close enough that the shrapnel peppered the Warthog's left engine and wing. Warning lights illuminated across her instrument panel, and she could feel the aircraft's handling characteristics change dramatically. The left engine was running rough, and hydraulic pressure was dropping rapidly. "Ghost is hit. Repeat, Ghost is hit." Sarah transmitted as she fought to maintain control. "Left engine damage and hydraulic problems. I'm staying in the fight as long as possible. Ghost, this is Eagle. We have you in sight. Heavy black, smoke trailing from your left engine. Recommend you egress to the nearest airfield immediately. Sarah gritted her teeth as she assessed her aircraft's condition. The Warthog was built to absorb tremendous amounts of battle damage and continue flying, but this hit was serious. The left engine was losing power steadily, and she was having to use increasing amounts of right rudder to maintain heading. Wolverine, what's the status on the ground? Ghost, we've got the situation under control thanks to your work. The Taliban are pulling back, and we should be able to get that evacuation helicopter in within the next 10 minutes. You've done your job here. Sarah made the difficult decision that every combat pilot dreads. She began climbing away from the target area, pointing the wounded Warthog toward the nearest friendly airfield. Jalalabad was about 40 miles to the southeast, but with one engine damaged and hydraulics failing, it was going to be a challenging flight. As she climbed, the left engine began running even rougher. Oil pressure was dropping, and the engine temperature was climbing rapidly. Sarah realized that she might not make it to Jalalabad. The terrain between her current position and the airfield was mountainous and hostile, with no suitable emergency landing sites. Eagle, I'm not sure I can make it to JF. Left engine is failing completely, and I'm losing hydraulic pressure fast. Copy, Ghost. We're with you. There's an emergency strip at Forward Operating Base Chapman, about 20 miles northeast of your position. It's shorter than ideal for an A-10, but it's your best option. Sarah turned toward Chapman, nursing the throttle on the failing engine and trying to maintain altitude. The Warthog was designed to fly on one engine, but the hydraulic problems were making control increasingly difficult. She had to use both hands on the stick to maintain level flight, and the aircraft was developing a pronounced yaw to the left. The mountains of eastern Afghanistan stretched out below her, their jagged peaks reaching up toward her crippled aircraft like grasping fingers. Sarah had flown over this terrain countless times, but it looked different now, more threatening. Every ridge and valley represented a potential crash site if a remaining engine failed. Chapman Tower, this is Ghost 01, declaring an emergency. Inbound with battle damage, single engine, and hydraulic failure. The tower at Chapman came back immediately. Ghost 01, Chapman Tower. Winds are calm. Runway 03 is clear for your emergency approach. Crash and rescuer standing by. Sarah could see the base now, a small collection of buildings and runways carved out of the Afghan wilderness. The runway looked impossibly short from her current altitude, but it was her only chance. She began her approach, flying the aircraft with both hands while her feet worked the rudder pedals to maintain directional control. At 5 miles out, the left engine finally quit completely. The sudden loss of power caused the aircraft to yaw violently to the left, and Sarah had to use full right rudder and aileron to maintain control. The Warthog was now flying like a brick with wings, but it was still flying. Tower, left engine has failed completely. I'm committed to this approach. Roger, Ghost 01. You're cleared to land any runway, any direction. Sarah lined up with the runway, fighting the aircraft every foot of the way down. The Warthog's approach speed was higher than normal due to the single-engine configuration, and the short runway at Chapman wasn't going to leave much room for error. She would have to hit her approach speed precisely and get the aircraft on the ground in the first third of the runway. As she crossed the runway threshold, Sarah could see the crash trucks racing into position alongside the runway. The Warthog touched down hard, and she immediately deployed the drag chute and applied maximum braking. The aircraft rolled down the runway, gradually slowing as it approached the far end. With less than 500 feet of runway remaining, the A-10 finally came to a stop. Sarah sat in the cockpit for a moment, her hands shaking from adrenaline and exhaustion. She had brought the wounded bird home, just as tail number 78-0691 had always done for every pilot who had flown it. As the crash crews surrounded her aircraft, Sarah began the shutdown procedure for the surviving engine. Through her canopy, she could see dozens of personnel running toward the Warthog, including several pilots from the F-16 squadron that operated out of Chapman. Among them was Captain Hartley, who had escorted her to safety. Sarah climbed down from the cockpit and was immediately surrounded by well-wishers and medical personnel. A flight surgeon insisted on checking her for injuries, but aside from some bruising from the high-G maneuvering, she was unharmed. The Warthog had taken the beating and protected its pilot, just as it was designed to do. "Hell of a job bringing that bird home," Hartley said as he approached. "I've never seen flying like that. The way you handled that missile attack while still supporting the ground forces was incredible." Sarah looked back at her aircraft, taking in the extent of the damage for the first time. The left engine nacelle was completely blackened, and she could see numerous shrapnel holes in the wing and fuselage. It was a miracle that the aircraft had continued to fly at all. "She's a tough old bird," Sarah said, patting the Warthog's nose. "This isn't the first time 78-069 has taken a beating and brought someone home." As the maintenance crews began their assessment of the aircraft, Sarah was escorted to the base operations center for debriefing. The mission had been a success. The Afghan outpost had held, the wounded had been evacuated, and the Taliban assault had been broken. But as she walked away from her damaged aircraft, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something about this incident was different. The surface-to-air missile attack had been sophisticated and well-coordinated. The Taliban didn't typically have access to radar-guided SAM systems, and the fact that the missiles had been fired from a concealed position suggested a level of planning and preparation that was unusual for the region. Someone had known that American aircraft would be operating in that area, and they had been prepared to engage them. In the operations center, Sarah was met by Major Lisa Viper Chun, the deputy commander of the F-16 squadron at Chapman. Chun was a veteran pilot with extensive combat experience, and her expression was serious as she greeted Sarah. "Captain Mitchell, welcome to Chapman. I've already spoken with your squadron commander, Epigram. He's relieved that you made it down safely." Chun paused and looked directly at Sarah. "I need to ask you some questions about what happened out there today, specifically about that SAM attack." Sarah nodded and took a seat in the briefing room. "What do you want to know? Tell me everything you can remember about the radar signatures, the missile launch, the timing. We need to understand how the enemy knew you were coming and how they managed to position a SAM system without our intelligence network detecting it." For the next 2 hours, Sarah recounted every detail of the mission. She described the radar warning indications, the missile launch sequence, and her evasive maneuvers. Chun took careful notes and asked probing questions about aspects of the encounter that Sarah might not have considered significant at the time. "One more thing," Chun said as the debriefing was concluding. "I need you to understand that this incident is going to generate a lot of attention. The fact that the Taliban managed to successfully engage one of our aircraft with sophisticated weapons is going to cause some serious concerns up the chain of command." Sarah frowned. "What kind of attention?" "The kind that involves investigators, intelligence analysts, and people asking hard questions about how this happened. Your aircraft is going to be thoroughly examined, and every aspect of this mission is going to be scrutinized." As Sarah left the briefing room, she felt a growing unease. The successful completion of the mission should have been cause for celebration, but instead, she felt like she was at the center of a mystery that was only beginning to unfold. The attack on her aircraft had been too precise, too well-timed to be a matter of chance. Walking back toward the maintenance hangar where her Warthog was being examined, Sarah encountered a group of F-16 pilots who had gathered around the damaged A-10. They were studying the aircraft with the professional interest that all pilots showed when examining battle damage, but she noticed that their conversation stopped abruptly when they saw her approaching. "How's she looking?" Sarah asked the maintenance chief, a grizzled sergeant with 20 years of experience working on military aircraft. The sergeant shook his head grimly. "I've seen a lot of battle damage, Captain, but this is something else. These holes weren't made by small arms fire or even typical shrapnel. The pattern and depth suggest something much more sophisticated." One of the F-16 pilots, a young lieutenant whose name Tape Red Falcon, spoke up. "Captain Mitchell, can I ask you something? When you were taking fire down there, did you notice anything unusual about the ground forces you were supporting?" Sarah looked at him carefully. "What do you mean?" I mean, did everything seem normal about the communications, the target identification, the way the mission unfolded? Before Sarah could answer, Major Chun appeared at her elbow. Lieutenant, I think that's enough questions for now. Captain Mitchell needs to rest. As Chun led Sarah away from the group, she lowered her voice. There are some things we need to discuss privately. Things that didn't come up in the official debriefing. They walked to Chin's office, a small space filled with flight charts and intelligence reports. Chin closed the door and gestured for Sarah to take a seat. Captain, I'm going to share some information with you that's classified, but you need to know what you've stumbled into. Chin's expression was grave. The mission you flew today wasn't routine. That outpost in Kuner has been the focus of intelligence operation for the past several weeks. Sarah leaned forward. What kind of operations? The kind where we're not entirely sure who all the players are. The Taliban forces you engaged today were unusually well-equipped and well-organized. And the fact that they had sophisticated surface-to-air missiles suggests they're getting support from someone with access to advanced weapons. The implications of Chin's words began to sink in. Are you saying that someone set up that attack specifically to target American aircraft? I'm saying that's one possibility we have to consider. And if that's the case, then whoever is responsible has just learned that they can successfully engage our close air support assets. Chin paused. That makes every pilot in this theater a target. As the evening wore on, Sarah found herself assigned to temporary quarters at Chapman while the investigation of her aircraft continued. She tried to sleep, but the events of the day kept replaying in her mind. The mission had started as a routine close air support request, but it had evolved into something much more complex and dangerous. The next morning brought new developments that would change everything Sarah thought she knew about her mission and the war she had been fighting in Afghanistan. Sarah was awakened at 0500 hours by a sharp knock on her door. Major Chin stood in the hallway, fully dressed and carrying a cup of coffee that steamed in the cold morning air. Get dressed, Captain. We need to talk, and we need to do it away from prying eyes. 20 minutes later, Sarah found herself walking alongside Chun toward a secure communications facility on the far side of the base. The morning air was crisp, and the mountains surrounding Chapman were shrouded in low-hanging clouds. It was the kind of morning that would normally have Sarah looking forward to a day of flying, but the events of the previous day had cast a shadow over everything. What I'm about to show you doesn't leave this room, Chun said as she led Sarah into a small briefing area. And what we discuss here is compartmented information that could get people killed if it falls into the wrong hands. The briefing room was equipped with multiple secure communication systems and banks of computer monitors displaying classified intelligence feeds. Chun activated one of the terminals and pulled up a series of satellite images that showed the area where Sarah had conducted her mission the previous day. These images were taken 6 hours before your mission began, Chun said, pointing to the screen. Do you see anything unusual about the terrain around the target area? Sarah studied the images carefully. The resolution was excellent, showing individual buildings and even vehicles in sharp detail. She could see the Afghan outpost, the tree line where the Taliban forces had been positioned, and the various terrain features she remembered from her attack runs. I don't see anything that stands out, Sarah said after a moment. Chun switched to a different set of images. These were taken 4 hours after your mission ended. The difference was immediately apparent. In several locations around the target area, Sarah could see what appeared to be vehicle tracks leading away from concealed positions. More troubling were several circular patterns in the dirt that looked suspiciously like the footprints of mobile radar systems. Someone was definitely operating SAM equipment in that area, Sarah said, but they moved it out quickly after the attack. Exactly. And here's what really concerns us. Chun brought up a third set of images, these taken from a different angle and at higher resolution. Look at this position about 2 kilometers north of where you were engaged. Sarah leaned closer to the screen and saw what appeared to be a small convoy of vehicles parked in a wadi that would have provided concealment from aerial observation. The vehicles were clearly military in nature, but they didn't match any known Taliban or Afghan army configurations. Who do those belong to? Sarah asked. That's the million-dollar question. The vehicle configuration suggests they're not Taliban, and they're definitely not Afghan army. The intelligence community is very interested in finding out who is operating sophisticated air defense systems in coordination with the Taliban forces you engaged. Shin pulled up another screen showing communication intercepts from the time period around Sarah's mission. The data was displayed in graphical format, showing frequency patterns and transmission times. During your mission, we intercepted several radio transmissions on frequencies that the Taliban don't normally use. The transmissions were encrypted with algorithms that are well beyond anything the Taliban have access to. Someone was coordinating that entire operation with military-grade communication equipment. The implications were staggering. Sarah had walked into what appeared to be a carefully planned operation involving multiple parties with sophisticated equipment and training. The routine close air support mission had been anything but routine. Do we know who is operating that equipment? Sarah asked. We have theories, but no confirmed intelligence. What we do know is that this represents a significant escalation in the capabilities being employed against our forces in Afghanistan. And the fact that they specifically targeted your aircraft suggests they were prepared for our response to the attack on the outpost. Chun switched to a map display showing the broader region around the target area. Red markers indicated known enemy positions, while blue markers showed friendly forces. Sarah could see that the area where she had been engaged was at the intersection of several key transportation routes and within range of multiple strategic targets. The attack on that Afghan outpost wasn't random, Chun continued. That position controls access to a mountain pass that's been used for smuggling weapons and personnel into Afghanistan for Pakistan. If the Taliban had succeeded in taking that outpost, they would have gained control of a critical infiltration route. So the whole thing was a setup, Sarah said. The attack on the outpost was designed to draw in American air support, so they could test their new air defense capabilities. That's our working theory. And if we're right, it means they're planning something much larger. You don't develop sophisticated air defense networks just to shoot down a single A-10. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a man in civilian clothes who introduced himself as Agent David Harrison from the Defense Intelligence Agency. Harrison was in his 40s, with the kind of weathered appearance that suggested extensive fieldwork in dangerous places. Captain Mitchell, I've been following the details of your mission yesterday. Impressive flying under extremely difficult circumstances. Harrison's tone was professional but friendly. I need to ask you some questions about what you observed during the engagement. For the next hour, Harrison took Sarah through every detail of the mission, asking about things she hadn't even considered significant at the time. He was particularly interested in the timing of the radar emissions and the coordination between the surface-to-air missile launches. When the first missile was launched, did you observe any change in the behavior of the ground forces you were supporting? Harrison asked. Sarah thought back to the mission. No, they continued to call on targets and coordinate with me normally. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez never gave any indication that anything was wrong. And what about the communication patterns? Did you notice any changes in radio traffic or procedures? Everything seemed normal from my perspective. The only thing that was unusual was how well-organized the Taliban resistance was. They seemed to be coordinating their movements more effectively than I typically see. Harrison made notes on a secure tablet and exchanged glances with Major Chun. Sarah got the impression that her answers were confirming suspicions they already had about the mission. Captain, I need to ask you to keep the details of this conversation confidential. We're dealing with information that could compromise ongoing operations if it becomes public knowledge. Harrison's expression was serious. We believe yesterday's incident is connected to a broader pattern of activity that threatens American forces throughout this region. After Harrison left, Chun walked Sarah to the base cafeteria for breakfast. The dining facility was crowded with personnel from various units, creating enough background noise to mask their conversation. There's something else you need to know, Chun said quietly. Your aircraft, tail number 78-0691, has a history that makes yesterday's incident even more concerning. Sarah looked up from her coffee. What kind of history? That particular Warthog has been involved in several significant missions over the past 2 years. Each time, It was providing close air support during operations that later turned out to have intelligence implications. Chen paused. Someone may have been specifically targeting that aircraft because of its operational history. The idea that her aircraft had been specifically targeted was disturbing enough, but Sarah realized there were broader implications. Are you saying someone has been tracking individual aircraft and their mission histories? It's possible. The level of intelligence required to coordinate yesterday's attack suggests access to information about American flight operations that should be highly classified. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Captain Tom Hartley, the F-16 pilot who had provided escort during Sarah's emergency landing the previous day. Hartley looked unusually serious as he approached their table. Major Chun, Captain Mitchell, I need to speak with you both. We just received some intelligence that changes everything about yesterday's incident. Chun looked around the cafeteria and then gestured toward the exit. Let's take this somewhere more private. They walked to a small conference room in the base operations building, where Hartley pulled out a classified folder and spread several photographs on the table. These images were taken by a reconnaissance drone that was operating in the area during Captain Mitchell's mission yesterday. We didn't receive them until this morning because of communication delays. The photographs showed the target area from a different angle than the satellite images Sarah had seen earlier. In several of the images, she could clearly see the Taliban positions she had attacked, but there were also other details that hadn't been visible from her cockpit. Look at this position here, Hartley said, pointing to a spot about a kilometer from the main engagement area. Do you see those vehicles? Sarah studied the image and could make out what appeared to be several trucks and possibly an armored personnel carrier positioned in a small valley. The vehicles were clearly not part of the Taliban force she had been engaging. Who are they? Sarah asked. That's what we're trying to figure out. But here's the really interesting part. Hartley switched to another photograph, this one taken during Sarah's missile evasion sequence. Look at the timing on this image. The photograph showed Sarah's A-10 in a steep diving turn, with two missile contrails clearly visible in pursuit. But what caught Sarah's attention was a reflection of light from one of the vehicles in the valley below. Someone had been watching the engagement through optical equipment. They were observing the entire engagement, Chun said grimly. This wasn't just an attack. It was a test of their capabilities against American aircraft, and they were documenting the results. Hartley nodded. Intelligence believes this is part of a broader effort to evaluate American air combat capabilities in preparation for something much larger. Over the next several hours, Sarah found herself at the center of an intensive intelligence analysis effort. Specialists from various agencies descended on Chapman to examine every aspect of the previous day's mission. Her aircraft was disassembled piece by piece, with each component being analyzed for evidence of the weapons that had been used against it. The results were troubling. The missile fragments recovered from the aircraft were identified as components from an advanced surface-to-air missile system that was not supposed to be available to Taliban forces in Afghanistan. The sophistication of the guidance system and warhead design suggested access to cutting-edge military technology. This is Russian-made equipment, explained Dr. Jennifer Walsh, a weapons analyst who had flown in from Kabul to examine the missile fragments. Specifically, it's from a system that was only recently introduced into service with the Russian military. Sarah stared at the twisted metal fragments spread across the examination table. How did the Taliban get access to Russian military equipment? They didn't, Dr. Walsh said flatly. This equipment requires extensive training to operate effectively, and the coordination we observed during your mission suggests professional military personnel were involved. The implications were staggering. If Russian military personnel were operating in Afghanistan and providing advanced air defense systems to Taliban forces, it represented a dramatic escalation in the conflict that could have global ramifications. That evening, Sarah was summoned to a secure video conference with senior military leaders at Central Command Headquarters. The participants included her squadron commander from Bagram, as well as generals she had never expected to brief personally. Captain Mitchell, began General Patricia Roberts, the Deputy Commander of Air Operations in Afghanistan. Your mission yesterday has provided us with critical intelligence about enemy capabilities that we didn't know existed in this theater. I need you to understand that what you experienced represents a fundamental shift in the nature of the threat we're facing. General Roberts explained that similar incidents had been reported by pilots operating in other areas of Afghanistan, but none had provided as much detailed information as Sarah's engagement. The combination of her combat experience and the survival of her aircraft had given intelligence analysts their first clear picture of the enemy's new capabilities. We're dealing with adversaries who have access to advanced weapon systems and the training to use them effectively, General Roberts continued. This changes our operational planning for every mission in this theater. Sarah was asked to provide recommendations based on her experience for how other pilots could better defend themselves against similar attacks. Her suggestions included modifications to flight patterns, enhanced electronic warfare equipment, and improved coordination between different types of aircraft operating in the same area. The video conference concluded with orders for Sarah to return to Bagram the following day to brief other 10 pilots on her experience. Her damaged aircraft would remain at Chapman for several more days while the investigation continued, but a replacement Warthog was being flown in to transport her back to her home base. That night, as Sarah prepared for what she hoped would be her last night at Chapman, she received an unexpected visitor. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, the forward air controller who had coordinated with her during the mission, had flown in from Khyber Province specifically to see her. "Captain Mitchell, I wanted to thank you personally for what you did yesterday," Rodriguez said as they walked along the flight line. "Those Marines you supported are all going home because of your actions under fire." Sarah appreciated the sentiment, but she was curious about Rodriguez's perspective on the mission. As the person on the ground, he might have observed details that weren't apparent from her cockpit. "Sergeant, during the mission, did you notice anything unusual about the enemy forces you were facing?" she asked. Rodriguez was quiet for a moment, as if considering how much to reveal. "There were some things that didn't add up, Captain. The Taliban fighters we were engaging were better equipped and better coordinated than anything I've seen in 6 months of operations in that area." "In what way?" "Their communication discipline was excellent. Their movement patterns were textbook military tactics, and they had equipment I'd never seen Taliban forces use before. Some of those guys were carrying weapons that cost more than most Afghan families make in a year." Rodriguez went on to describe other details that supported the growing intelligence picture of a sophisticated enemy force with capabilities far beyond what the Taliban typically possessed. "There's one more thing, Captain. During the heaviest part of the engagement, I could swear I heard someone giving orders in a language that wasn't Pashto or Dari. It sounded European, maybe Russian. This was the first direct evidence that foreign military personnel might have been present during the engagement." Sarah realized that her mission had provided not just intelligence about enemy capabilities, but potentially proof of foreign military involvement in Afghanistan. As they concluded their conversation, Rodriguez handed Sarah a small package wrapped in cloth. "This is from the Marines you supported yesterday. They wanted you to have it." Inside the package was a combat patch from the Marine Reconnaissance Unit, along with a handwritten note signed by all the team members. The note thanked her for her actions and included the phrase Semper Fidelis in each Marine's handwriting. The following morning brought the arrival of Sarah's replacement aircraft, another A-10 Warthog that would take her back to Bagram. As she conducted her pre-flight inspection of the new aircraft, Sarah couldn't help but compare it to tail number 78-0691, which sat in the maintenance hangar bearing the scars of the previous day's battle. The maintenance chief approached as she completed her inspection. "Captain, I thought you'd want to know that we've found some interesting things in your old bird." He led her into the hangar where her damaged aircraft was being examined. The level of analysis was incredible. Every system had been disconnected and examined, and technicians were documenting every piece of battle damage with photographic precision. "The pattern of damage tells a story," the maintenance chief explained. "The missiles that hit your aircraft were designed to disable rather than destroy. If they had wanted to shoot you down, they would have used different warheads." Sarah studied the damage pattern with new understanding. The shrapnel had primarily affected non-critical systems, and the engine damage, while serious, hadn't been immediately catastrophic. Someone had wanted to force her down rather than kill her. Why would they want to capture rather than destroy an American aircraft? She asked. Could be they wanted to examine our aircraft and equipment, or maybe they wanted to capture a pilot for intelligence purposes. Either way, it suggests a level of strategic thinking that goes beyond typical Taliban operations. As Sarah prepared to depart Chapman, she was approached by Agent Harrison one final time. He handed her a secure communication device and a set of coded contact procedures. Captain, what you've experienced is just the beginning of something much larger. We may need to contact you again as this situation develops. Harrison's expression was grave. The information you've provided has opened up an investigation that reaches far beyond Afghanistan. The flight back to Bagram gave Sarah time to process everything she had learned over the past 2 days. What had started as a routine, close air support mission had revealed a sophisticated enemy network with advanced capabilities and possible foreign backing. Her damaged Warthog had provided intelligence that was reshaping how American forces understood the nature of the conflict in Afghanistan. As Bagram Airfield came into view, Sarah could see the familiar sight of 10 Warthogs parked on the flight line. Each aircraft represented countless missions flown by pilots who trusted their lives to the rugged design and proven capabilities of the Thunderbolt II. But now she understood that even the mighty Warthog was vulnerable to new threats that were emerging in the Afghan conflict. Landing at Bagram felt like coming home, but Sarah knew that everything had changed. The war she had been fighting was more complex and dangerous than anyone had realized, and the enemy was more sophisticated and better equipped than intelligence had indicated. The next phase of the conflict would require new tactics, new equipment, and a fundamental reassessment of the threats facing American forces. As she taxied to the parking area, Sarah could see her squadron commander and several other pilots waiting for her arrival. They would want to hear about her experience firsthand, and she would need to share what she had learned to help protect other pilots who would face similar threats in the coming weeks and months. But as she shut down the engines and began her post-flight procedures, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that her ordeal was far from over. The sophisticated attack on her aircraft had been carefully planned and expertly executed, suggesting an adversary with capabilities and intentions that were only beginning to be understood. The war in Afghanistan was about to enter a new and more dangerous phase, and Sarah Mitchell had just become one of the first American pilots to face the full extent of the emerging threat. The briefing room at Bagram Airfield was packed with every A-10 pilot in the squadron, plus several visiting pilots from other units who had flown in specifically to hear Sarah's account. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison stood at the front of the room, his expression grim as he prepared to address the assembled aviators. What Captain Mitchell experienced 2 days ago represents a fundamental shift in the threat environment we're operating in, Morrison began. The information she gathered during her engagement has intelligence implications that reach far beyond our squadron, but it also has immediate tactical implications for every pilot in this room. Sarah took her position at the briefing podium, still feeling the effects of the intense analysis sessions she had endured at Chapman. The secure communication device Agent Harrison had given her was clipped to her flight suit, a constant reminder that her involvement in this situation was far from over. The mission started as routine close air support, Sarah began, but it quickly became apparent that we were dealing with enemy forces that were far more sophisticated than anything I'd encountered in 46 previous missions. She walked the assembled pilots through every aspect of the engagement, from the initial target identification through the surface-to-air missile attack and emergency landing. The room was completely silent as she described the advanced radar systems and the precision of the missile attack. The key point is that this wasn't a lucky shot by insurgents with shoulder-fired weapons, Sarah emphasized. This was a coordinated attack using military-grade equipment operated by personnel with advanced training. Captain Mike "Thunder" Johnson, one of the most experienced pilots in the squadron, raised his hand. Sarah, you mentioned that the radar warning came on gradually. Can you describe the specific characteristics of the emissions you detected? Sarah referred to her notes from the extensive debriefing sessions. The initial emissions were consistent with a search radar, probably operating in the C-band frequency range. But about 2 minutes before the missile launch, I detected tracking radar signatures that indicated a much more sophisticated system. That suggests they were being selective about when they revealed their full capabilities, observed Captain Lisa Razor Thompson. They wanted to observe your attack patterns before committing to an engagement. The implications were troubling for every pilot in the room. If the enemy was capable of observing American attack patterns and adapting their defensive measures accordingly, it represented a level of tactical sophistication that would require fundamental changes in how close air support missions were conducted. Major Jennifer Hawk Davis, the squadron's intelligence officer, stepped forward to address the group. Based on Captain Mitchell's experience and subsequent intelligence analysis, we're implementing immediate changes to our operational procedures. Every close air support mission will now include electronic warfare support, and we're modifying our attack patterns to make targeting more difficult for surface-to-air missile systems. The briefing continued for 2 hours, with pilots asking detailed questions about every aspect of Sarah's mission. The discussion revealed that several other pilots had experienced unusual radar emissions during recent missions, but none had faced the coordinated attack that Sarah had encountered. As the formal briefing concluded, Sarah was approached by Captain James Viper Rodriguez, a pilot who had recently transferred to the squadron from a unit operating in Iraq. Rodriguez had an expression of concern that went beyond professional interest. "Sarah, can I talk to you privately? There's something about your mission description that sounds familiar." They walked to a quiet corner of the pilot-ready room, where Rodriguez pulled out a classified folder containing mission reports from his previous assignment. 3 weeks ago, my old squadron lost an A-10 over western Iraq under circumstances that sound remarkably similar to what you experienced, Rodriguez said quietly. The pilot, Captain David Chun, was conducting close air support when he was engaged by surface-to-air missiles using radar-guided systems. Sarah felt a chill as she absorbed this information. Was Captain Chun able to evade the missiles? Rodriguez's expression darkened. No, his aircraft was hit by 2 missiles and crashed in enemy territory. We never recovered the pilot or the aircraft. The implications were staggering. If similar attacks were occurring in Iraq, it suggested that the sophisticated air defense capabilities Sarah had encountered were not limited to Afghanistan. Someone was deploying advanced military technology against American forces across multiple theaters of operation. "Have you reported this connection to intelligence?" Sarah asked. "I tried, but the Iraq incident was classified at a higher level than most people here have access to. The official report listed it as an equipment malfunction rather than enemy action." Sarah realized that the scope of the threat might be much larger than anyone at Bagram understood. She pulled out the secure communication device Agent Harrison had given her and activated the emergency contact protocol. Within 30 minutes, Harrison was on a secure video link from Kabul, along with several other officials whose titles were not disclosed during the conversation. "Captain Mitchell, Captain Rodriguez, thank you for bringing this information to our attention. The connection between these incidents is something we've been investigating, but we didn't have confirmation until now." Harrison explained that intelligence agencies have been tracking a pattern of attacks against American aircraft across the Middle East, but the incidents have been classified separately and the connections hadn't been fully analyzed. "What we're dealing with is a coordinated effort to test and degrade American air superiority across multiple regions," Harrison continued. "The weapon systems being employed are consistent with advanced Russian military technology, but we haven't been able to confirm the source or the ultimate objective." The video conference was interrupted by an urgent message that caused Harrison to confer with his colleagues off-camera for several minutes. When he returned, his expression was even more serious than before. "We just received intelligence indicating that a large-scale operation is being planned that will involve simultaneous attacks against American air assets in Afghanistan, Iraq, and possibly Syria. Your experiences have provided us with critical information about enemy capabilities, but we need to act quickly to prevent a coordinated assault." Sarah found herself being drawn deeper into an intelligence operation that was far beyond her normal responsibilities as an A-10 pilot. Harrison explained that her first-hand experience with the enemy's tactics made her valuable for analyzing other potential attack scenarios. We need you to review mission reports from other incidents and help us identify patterns that might indicate where the next attacks will occur, Harrison said. Your tactical expertise could be the key to preventing other pilots from being shot down. Over the next 3 days, Sarah found herself working closely with intelligence analysts to examine dozens of mission reports from across the region. The pattern that emerged was deeply troubling. Enemy forces were systematically probing American air defenses and gathering intelligence about flight patterns, response times, and tactical procedures. They're not just trying to shoot down individual aircraft, Sarah realized during one of the analysis sessions. They're mapping our entire air operations network so they can disrupt it when they're ready to launch whatever they're planning. The analysis also revealed that the attacks were being coordinated through sophisticated communication networks that suggested state-level support. The level of planning and resource allocation required for such an operation was beyond the capabilities of terrorist organizations or insurgent groups. On the 4th day after her return to Bagram, Sarah was awakened at 0300 hours by urgent communication from the secure device Harrison had given her. The message was brief but alarming. Major attack imminent. Report to Ops Center immediately. The base operations center was buzzing with activity as personnel from various intelligence agencies worked frantically to coordinate defensive measures. Sarah was briefed on an intercepted communication that indicated coordinated attacks against American air bases were scheduled to begin within the next 12 hours. The pattern we've identified suggests that Bagram is likely to be one of the primary targets, explained Colonel Michael Steele Patterson, who had flown in from Central Command to coordinate the defense effort. We need every available pilot and aircraft ready for immediate response. Sarah joined the effort to prepare the squadron for what could be the most significant air combat engagement in Afghanistan since the beginning of the conflict. Every A-10 in the squadron was being armed with full combat loads, and additional electronic warfare equipment was being hastily installed to counter the sophisticated radar systems the enemy was known to possess. As the sun rose over Bagram, Sarah found herself back in the cockpit of an A-10 Warthog, this time aircraft tail number 79-0147. The irony was not lost on her that she was preparing to face the same enemy that had nearly shot her down just days earlier, but this time she was armed with knowledge of their capabilities and tactics. The morning briefing revealed the full scope of the threat. Intelligence indicated that coordinated attacks were planned against American air bases in Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria, with the objective of degrading American air support capabilities across the entire region. The attacks would involve sophisticated surface-to-air missile systems, electronic warfare equipment, and possibly even enemy aircraft. What had seemed like isolated incidents were actually part of a coordinated campaign by a sophisticated adversary with advanced capabilities and strategic objectives. The takeoff from Bagram was conducted under heightened security protocols, with fighter aircraft providing escort and electronic warfare systems jamming potential enemy communications. Sarah's formation climbed rapidly toward their assigned patrol area, knowing that they might be flying into the most dangerous combat situation any of them had ever faced. 20 minutes after takeoff, Sarah's radar warning receiver began detecting emissions from multiple radar systems operating in the mountains around Bagram. The signatures were consistent with the advanced systems she had encountered during her previous mission, but this time there were many more of them. Ghost Flight, this is AWACS. We're showing multiple SAM sites becoming active in your patrol area. Be advised that enemy forces are likely preparing for coordinated attacks against the base. Sarah acknowledged the warning and began coordinating with her flight members to systematically search for and engage the surface-to-air missile sites. The terrain was challenging with numerous valleys and ridgelines that could conceal enemy positions. The first contact came 15 minutes later, when Lieutenant Marcus Bolt Stevens reported visual contact with vehicles in a valley about 10 kilometers northeast of Bagram. Ghost Lead, Ghost 3. I've got eyes on what appears to be a mobile SAM site. Multiple vehicles, including what looks like a radar truck and launcher vehicle. Sarah maneuvered her formation to investigate the sighting, and quickly confirmed that they had found one of the enemy installations. The site was well camouflaged and positioned to provide overlapping coverage with other installations that were likely nearby. Ghost Flight, this is Ghost Lead. We're going to conduct coordinated attacks on confirmed SAM sites. Stay alert for missile launches and be prepared for immediate evasive action. The attack on the first site went smoothly, with Sarah's GU-8 cannon and Maverick missiles destroying the radar truck and launcher vehicles in quick succession. But as her formation began searching for additional sites, the enemy response was swift and coordinated. Sarah's radar warning receiver suddenly lit up with multiple tracking radars, and within seconds her missile warning system was screaming alerts. The sky around her formation filled with surface-to-air missiles launched from positions they hadn't yet identified. Missiles in the air, multiple launches from multiple sites. Sarah transmitted as she threw her aircraft into defensive maneuvers. What followed was the most intense air combat engagement Sarah had ever experienced. Enemy missiles filled the sky as her formation attempted to locate and engage the launch sites while simultaneously defending themselves against coordinated attacks. The sophistication of the enemy operation was immediately apparent. The missile launches were timed to force Sarah's formation into predictable evasion patterns that exposed them to additional threats. The coordination suggested professional military training and communication systems far beyond anything the Taliban possessed. Ghost Lead, Ghost 4 is hit, came the voice of Captain Jennifer Falcon Martinez over the radio. Left engine fire, hydraulics failing. I'm heading for base. Sarah watched in her peripheral vision as Martinez's aircraft trailed black smoke and began a shallow descent toward Bagram. The attack had drawn first blood, and Sarah realized that her formation was facing a level of opposition that could overwhelm their defensive capabilities. Ghost Flight, concentrate fire on the primary radar site, bearing 045 degrees. If we can take out their main tracking system, it will degrade their ability to coordinate missile launches. For the next 20 minutes, Sarah's formation engaged in a running battle with enemy forces positioned throughout the mountains around Bagram. The enemy's tactics were sophisticated and adaptive, with new missile sites revealing themselves as soon as existing sites were destroyed. The turning point came when Sarah identified what appeared to be a command and control vehicle positioned on a ridgeline overlooking the entire engagement area. The vehicle was heavily camouflaged and defended by multiple surface-to-air missile sites, but Sarah realized that it was likely coordinating the entire enemy operation. Ghost Flight, I'm going after the command vehicle. Cover me while I make the attack run. Sarah dove toward the ridgeline, her aircraft screaming through defensive missile fire as she lined up on the command vehicle. The GU-8 cannon erupted as she fired a long burst that walked across the target area, destroying not only the command vehicle, but also several communication arrays that had been hidden nearby. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The coordinated missile launches stopped, and the remaining enemy positions began operating independently rather than as part of a unified defense network. Ghost Lead, this is AWACS. Nice work on that command site. We're showing a significant decrease in enemy radar activity across the entire region. As Sarah's formation regrouped and began the flight back to Bagram, she realized that they had just participated in a pivotal engagement that had prevented a major enemy offensive. The intelligence they had gathered about enemy capabilities had been crucial in identifying and neutralizing the threat before it could achieve its objectives. The landing at Bagram revealed the full scope of the morning's action. In addition to Sarah's engagement, A-10 and F-16 formations had engaged enemy forces at multiple locations around the base. The coordinated defensive effort had succeeded in preventing the enemy from achieving their objectives, but the intensity of the attacks had demonstrated that American forces were facing a far more sophisticated adversary than anyone had previously realized. In the post-mission debriefing, Colonel Patterson revealed the broader context of the morning's engagements. Similar attacks have been attempted against American bases in Iraq and Syria, but advance warning based on the intelligence gathered from Sarah's original mission had allowed defensive measures to be put in place. The information Captain Mitchell provided about enemy capabilities and tactics was crucial in allowing us to prepare for and defeat this coordinated offensive, Patterson explained. Without that intelligence, we might have faced significant losses of aircraft and personnel. Sarah realized that her experience during that first mission in Khyuna Province had been the key to preventing a much larger disaster. The damaged Warthog that had limped back to Chapman had carried with it information that had ultimately saved American lives across multiple theaters of operation. As the briefing concluded, Agent Harrison appeared on the secure video link one final time. "Captain Mitchell, I wanted to personally thank you for your role in this operation. The intelligence you provided has allowed us to identify and neutralize a significant threat to American forces throughout the region." Harrison went on to explain that the coordinated attacks had been part of a broader strategy to degrade American air capabilities in preparation for a larger offensive that would have threatened the stability of the entire region. The enemy's plan was sophisticated and well-resourced, but it depended on achieving surprise and overwhelming our defensive capabilities. Your experience and the intelligence it provided allowed us to turn the tables and defeat their offensive before it could achieve its objectives. As Sarah left the briefing room and walked toward the flight line, she reflected on how her routine mission just days earlier had evolved into something with strategic implications for the entire conflict. The damaged Warthog, tail number 78-0691, had provided far more than just another successful close air support mission. The aircraft that had taken her out of the sky and then brought her safely home had ultimately prevented a much larger tragedy. The scars it bore from that engagement had told a story that intelligence analysts could read, and that story had provided the key to defeating a sophisticated enemy offensive. Looking across the flight line at the A-10 Warthogs preparing for their next missions, Sarah understood that the war in Afghanistan had changed fundamentally. The enemy was more sophisticated and better equipped than anyone had realized, but American forces had proven they could adapt and overcome even the most advanced threats when armed with good intelligence and the determination to fight. 3 weeks after the coordinated enemy offensive had been defeated, Sarah found herself standing in a secure hangar at Bagram Airfield, staring at the rebuilt aircraft that had started this entire chain of events. Tail number 78-0691 had been completely restored, its battle scars replaced with new metal and updated systems. But more importantly, it had been equipped with advanced electronic warfare equipment that would help protect future pilots from the threats Sarah had faced. The restoration had taken teams of specialists working around the clock to not only repair the battle damage, but also to incorporate lessons learned from the intelligence analysis of the attack. The aircraft was now equipped with enhanced radar warning systems, improved defensive countermeasures, and communication equipment that would allow real-time coordination with intelligence assets. "She's ready to fly again," announced Chief Master Sergeant Patricia Wrench Williams, the lead maintenance technician who had overseen the restoration. "But she's not the same aircraft that took that beating 3 weeks ago. The upgrades we've installed will make her one of the most advanced A-10s in the fleet." Sarah ran her hand along the aircraft's fuselage, feeling the smooth, new metal where shrapnel holes had been expertly repaired. The Warthog looked almost new, but she knew that beneath the fresh paint and polished surfaces lay an aircraft that had been through combat and emerged stronger. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison approached as Sarah completed her inspection of the restored aircraft. His expression carried a mixture of pride and concern that had become familiar to Sarah over the past few weeks. "Captain Mitchell, I have new orders for you. You're being temporarily assigned to a joint task force that's been established to investigate and counter the threat networks we've identified. Your experience with enemy tactics and equipment makes you valuable for future operations." Sarah had been expecting something like this. The intelligence gathered from her mission had opened up investigations that reached far beyond Afghanistan, and her first-hand knowledge of enemy capabilities made her a valuable asset for understanding and countering similar threats. "What kind of operations are we talking about, Colonel?" "The kind that involve hunting down the sources of the advanced weapons systems that were used against you. Intelligence has identified supply networks and training facilities that are supporting enemy operations across multiple countries. We need pilots who understand how these weapons work in combat to help develop effective countermeasures. The assignment would take Sarah away from her squadron and into a world of intelligence operations and international intrigue that she had never imagined when she first climbed into the cockpit of an A-10. But she also understood that the threat they had identified was too important to ignore. Over the next several days, Sarah underwent intensive briefings about the scope of the enemy network they were investigating. The picture that emerged was staggering in its complexity and ambition. What had appeared to be isolated incidents of advanced weapons being used against American forces was actually part of a coordinated campaign to degrade American military capabilities worldwide. The weapon systems you encountered are being supplied through networks that reach from Eastern Europe through the Middle East and into Africa, explained Dr. Michael Chun, intelligence analyst who specialized in weapons proliferation. The coordination and sophistication of these networks suggests state-level support and strategic planning. The briefings revealed that the surface-to-air missiles that had attacked Sarah's aircraft were just one component of a much larger arsenal being distributed to proxy forces and terrorist organizations. The ultimate objective appeared to be creating a situation where American air power could be effectively challenged in any region where the United States chose to operate. They're not trying to win a conventional war, Dr. Chin continued. They're trying to make American military intervention so costly and risky that we'll choose not to engage in regions where they want to expand their influence. Sarah's new assignment involved working with a team of specialists to develop tactics and procedures for operating in environments where advanced air defense systems were present. Her combat experience would be crucial for understanding how these weapons performed in real-world conditions and how American pilots could best defend themselves. The team included pilots from various aircraft types, electronic warfare specialists, and intelligence analysts who had been studying enemy tactics and equipment. Their mission was to develop new training programs and operational procedures that would help American forces maintain air superiority despite the proliferation of advanced defensive systems. The key insight from your experience, explained Major Lisa Phoenix Carter, an F-16 pilot who had been assigned to lead the tactical development effort, is that these systems are most effective when they can observe and analyze our attack patterns. We need to develop unpredictable tactics that make targeting difficult. For Sarah, this meant spending hours in flight simulators and analysis sessions, recreating the conditions of her original mission, and testing different approaches that might have been more effective against the threat she had faced. The process was exhausting but educational, revealing aspects of the engagement that she hadn't fully understood at the time. One of the most important discoveries was that the enemy's electronic warfare capabilities were more advanced than initially realized. The radar emissions that had warned Sarah of the missile attack had actually been carefully controlled to provide just enough information to appear threatening without revealing the full capabilities of the system. They wanted you to know they were there, explained Captain Robert Spark Johnson, an electronic warfare officer who had analyzed the radar signatures from Sarah's mission. But they also wanted to conceal their true capabilities until they were ready to attack. It's a level of sophistication that suggests professional military training. This insight led to the development of new electronic warfare tactics designed to force enemy systems to reveal their full capabilities early in an engagement, when American forces would be better positioned to counter them. The techniques were based partly on Sarah's description of how the threat had evolved during her mission. 3 months into her new assignment, Sarah received an unexpected communication through the secure device Agent Harrison had given her. The message was brief but urgent. New intelligence. Immediate meeting required. The meeting took place in a secure facility outside Kabul, where Harrison introduced Sarah to a man identified only as Michael, who claimed to represent international intelligence services investigating the weapons networks. Captain Mitchell, we've made a breakthrough in understanding the source of the weapons that were used against you, Michael began. What we've discovered has implications that reach far beyond the Afghanistan conflict. Michael explained that intercepted communications and financial records had revealed that the advanced weapons systems were being purchased through legitimate defense contractors by countries that were supposedly allied with the United States. These countries were then transferring the weapons to proxy forces and terrorist organizations through complex networks designed to obscure their origins. The weapons that attacked her aircraft were originally sold to a NATO ally as part of a legitimate defense agreement, Michael continued. But they were then transferred through a series of intermediaries to end up in the hands of Taliban forces in Afghanistan. The implications were staggering. If allied nations were either deliberately or inadvertently supplying advanced weapons to America's enemies, it represented a fundamental breakdown in the international arms control system that had been established after World War II. We need your help to trace these weapons networks and identify how the transfers are taking place, Michael said. Your technical knowledge of how these weapons perform in combat is crucial for understanding how they're being tested and improved by enemy forces. Sarah found herself agreeing to an assignment that would take her even further from traditional military operations and deeper into the world of international intelligence. The mission would involve traveling to multiple countries to investigate defense contractors, arms dealers, and government officials who might be involved in the weapons transfers. The first phase of the investigation took Sarah to Eastern Europe, where she worked with local intelligence services to examine facilities where advanced air defense systems were manufactured. The experience was eye-opening, revealing the ease with which military-grade weapons could be purchased and transferred through legal channels. The problem isn't that people are stealing these weapons, explained Agent Sarah Raven Kowalski, who worked for an international organization that tracked arms transfers. The problem is that the legal international arms trade has so many loopholes and exemptions that weapons can be transferred multiple times before anyone realizes they've ended up in the wrong hands. Sarah spent weeks visiting manufacturing facilities, government offices, and intelligence installations across Eastern Europe, gathering information about how weapons were produced, sold, and transferred to end users. The complexity of the international arms trade was staggering, with multiple layers of brokers, financing arrangements, and legal jurisdictions that made tracking individual weapons extremely difficult. The investigation revealed that the surface-to-air missile system that had attacked Sarah's aircraft had been sold originally to a Middle Eastern country as part of a defensive upgrade program. The country had then claimed that the weapons were needed to defend against terrorist threats, when in reality they were being transferred to proxy forces operating in Afghanistan and Iraq. The beauty of the system, from their perspective, is that every transfer was technically legal under international law, Agent Kowalski explained. By the time the weapons reached enemy forces, they had changed hands so many times that proving the original intent was nearly impossible. Sarah's investigation also revealed that the enemy's tactics were constantly evolving based on their experiences engaging American forces. The missile attack she had survived had been carefully analyzed by enemy technicians, who had then made improvements to their tactics and equipment based on what they had learned. They're treating every engagement with American forces as a learning opportunity, Sarah realized during one of her briefing sessions. Each time they attack one of our aircraft, they gather data that makes them more effective in future engagements. This insight led to a fundamental shift in how American forces approached combat operations. Instead of treating each engagement as an isolated incident, military planners began developing tactics designed to provide false information to enemy observers while protecting American capabilities from analysis. 6 months after beginning her investigation, Sarah was recalled to Afghanistan for a special mission that would test the new tactics and equipment that had been developed based on her experiences. The mission involved providing close air support for a ground operation in the same region where her original encounter had taken place. Flying tail number 78-0691 for the first time since its restoration, Sarah found herself approaching the familiar terrain of Khyber province with a much deeper understanding of the threats she might face. The aircraft was equipped with the latest electronic warfare systems and defensive countermeasures, and Sarah had been trained in new tactics designed to minimize the effectiveness of enemy air defense systems. "Ghost, this is Wolverine. Good to be working with you again." The voice belonged to Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, who is once again serving as forward air controller for ground forces in the region. Good to hear your voice, Wolverine. Are we expecting the same kind of opposition as last time? Intelligence suggests the enemy has upgraded their capabilities since your last visit. But we've got some surprises of our own this time. The mission proceeded very differently from Sarah's original encounter in the region. Instead of maintaining predictable flight patterns that enemy forces could analyze, Sarah employed random variations in altitude, heading, and attack approaches that made targeting difficult for surface-to-air missile systems. When enemy radar systems became active, Sarah's enhanced electronic warfare equipment immediately began jamming their signals while simultaneously gathering intelligence about their capabilities. The new tactics were designed to blind enemy systems while providing American forces with detailed information about their locations and weaknesses. Ghost were showing multiple SAM sites becoming active, but they appear to be having difficulty maintaining target locks, reported the AWACS controller monitoring the engagement. The effectiveness of the new tactics became apparent when enemy forces attempted to engage Sarah's aircraft with surface-to-air missiles. The missiles, launched from positions that would have been nearly impossible to detect using previous methods, missed their target by wide margins due to the electronic countermeasures and unpredictable flight patterns Sarah was employing. Wolverine, I'm detecting missile launches, but the threat systems don't appear to be functioning effectively. I'm going to take advantage of the opportunity to engage their positions. What followed was a systematic destruction of enemy air defense sites that had been carefully positioned to ambush American aircraft. The combination of enhanced electronic warfare capabilities and improved tactics allowed Sarah to locate and engage targets that would have been extremely dangerous during her previous mission. The engagement concluded with the complete neutralization of enemy forces in the region, accomplished with no damage to American aircraft. The success demonstrated that the lessons learned from Sarah's original encounter had been effectively translated into practical improvements in combat capabilities. During the post-mission debriefing, Colonel Patterson, who had flown in from Central Command to observe the operation, expressed his satisfaction with the results. Captain Mitchell, the tactics and equipment you've helped develop have fundamentally changed our ability to operate in high-threat environments. What you've accomplished goes far beyond a single successful mission. Patterson went on to explain that the techniques developed through Sarah's investigation were being implemented across all American air operations in the Middle East and other regions where advanced air defense threats were present. The intelligence you've gathered about enemy networks and capabilities has allowed us to stay ahead of their technological developments. More importantly, your experience has helped us develop training programs that are preparing other pilots to face similar threats. As Sarah reflected on the journey that had begun with a routine close air support mission and evolved into an international investigation of weapons networks, she realized that her role as a military pilot had expanded far beyond what she had originally envisioned. The damaged Warthog that had limped back to Chapman months earlier had carried with it information that had ultimately reshaped American understanding of modern air combat threats. The investigation that followed had revealed networks of weapons proliferation that threatened not just American forces, but international stability. Standing once again beside tail number 78-0691, now fully restored and equipped with the latest defensive systems, Sarah understood that her aircraft had become more than just a weapon of war. It had become a symbol of American adaptability and determination to overcome even the most sophisticated threats. The scars from that first engagement had been repaired, but the lessons learned from analyzing those scars had made every American pilot safer. The aircraft that had been taken out of the sky by an advanced enemy weapons system had ultimately provided the key to defeating that very threat. As Sarah prepared for her next assignment, which would involve training other pilots in the tactics and procedures she had helped develop, she knew that her experience would continue to protect American lives for years to come. The investigation was ongoing, with new intelligence constantly revealing additional aspects of the enemy networks they were fighting. But the fundamental breakthrough had been achieved. American forces now understood the nature of the threat they were facing and had developed effective countermeasures. The sophisticated enemy offensive that had nearly succeeded months earlier would not catch American forces unprepared again. The war in Afghanistan continued, but it was now being fought with a much clearer understanding of the enemy's capabilities and intentions. And at the center of that understanding was the intelligence gathered from one damaged A-10 Warthog and the pilot who had brought it home despite seemingly impossible odds. The tail number 78-0691 had become legendary among A-10 pilots, not just for its combat record, but for its role in protecting every pilot who flew after Sarah's historic mission. The aircraft that had been targeted specifically because of its operational history had ultimately made that history the foundation for a new era of American air combat superiority. For Sarah, the knowledge that her experience had contributed to something larger than herself provided a sense of purpose that extended far beyond individual missions or personal accomplishments. The damaged Warthog had told a story that intelligence analysts could read, and that story had changed the course of a war.